Wildings, welcome back to the Wilding Astro Tarot YouTube channel for another astrology video today. Y'all have been really on my case on my TikTok page since I just posted like a couple of videos that I actually didn't think would do that well about death in astrology, and it's got some of y'all real curious about potentially predicting your own death or someone else's death using astrology. So I'm going to teach you how I do it. Especially because obviously I can't respond to everyone's comment and give you free death readings, and not everyone can request a reading with me and add on a death reading as part of their astrology reading with me. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. Obviously getting it done professionally is the best bet, but the advantage of doing it yourself is that usually intuitively you can kind of vibe out what you think is your most likely cause of death. Like, you know yourself better than anyone else. And so even when astrologers are like picking up on your energy and can read, like, let's say fairly accurately, there's an inner knowing within yourself that will probably lead you to the right place, even if you're making guesses kind of along the way. Like, you'll probably still get to the same result in the end. So with this, take all the knowledge, do all the steps, but then ultimately like consult your intuition and seeing if it's like guiding you more towards one thing or another, because you're probably going to be able to trust it. And it's probably going to be able to fill in the gaps between you doing it for yourself and you getting a professional astrology reading done. So yeah, let's get into the video. Let me explain how I read death in astrology. So what you're going to need to read death in a birth chart is obviously you're going to need your birth chart with a very accurate time of birth, place of birth, and obviously the date as well, because a lot changes based on even being a few hundred kilometers away or being like a few minutes away, especially like the degrees that end up playing an important role. So it's really important that you have all the accurate information, and so you can Google that to make sure you're getting the right birth chart. And so once you have your birth chart, the main things that we're going to be looking at is the 8th house, Mars, and the 8th house ruler. And the reason why we look at these things is the 8th house stores death. Basically everything in life follows patterns. Which is why there's things like sacred geometry and things like that. There's always patterns to things. And in the birth chart, things that follow the same pattern are all grouped together. And this is why things like marriages as well as divorces, open enemies as well as lovers are all in the 7th house, because while they seem different, they follow the same patterns in life. So all of the 8th house themes will follow a similar pattern, and you're just reading it to whichever theme that you're looking at. So we're going to be looking at the 8th house, particularly how the 8th house patterns are going to manifest in a death fashion. Hopefully that makes sense. You might need to play this back a couple of times. And the reason why we look at Mars is because Mars is the planet of aggression. But the thing about aggression is that although you think of aggression towards others, we're also often very aggressive towards ourselves. And so we need to know how we're aggressive towards ourselves, because it usually plays into our demise. It might not be the main thing, so we always look at the 8th house first, but the second thing we look at is Mars and how we're being aggressive towards ourselves, because that will tend to exacerbate whatever death-like tendency we might have in our chart. And this can be applied very broadly, like we're going to be specifically looking at death, but for example, I'm a Cancer, Mars in the 11th house, so I've definitely been around people in my life that have kept me really small, definitely been more of a martyr type in the past as well. Like, that's how I'm aggressive towards myself. So yeah, Mars is a good indicator of like things that we can be consistently aggressive towards ourselves about, which might kind of exacerbate things from the 8th house that are going to ultimately lead to our demise. And finally, the reason why we look at the 8th house ruler is that with all of the patterns within the chart, the ruler of the house usually gives you more ideas about the conditions under which whatever theme you're looking at is going to go down, which is why you look at the 7th house ruler when you want to know kind of the condition of partners, potential enemies, things like that. Next, we'll look at some rules or guidelines to abide by when applying this to your chart. So I personally always use Placidus house systems to read charts because I find it's way, way, way more accurate. If you're more of a beginner, it's probably easier to just use whole sign if you're like super, super, super new to astrology. If you're like a little bit familiar with astrology, I recommend trying to follow along with using the Placidus system because, yeah, you'll learn to be more accurate than, just using whole sign, given that whole sign definitely rounds a lot off. And also if you have a late degree rising sign, whole sign makes your chart a lot more inaccurate. So yeah, I recommend having both open because we will use our whole sign chart ruler, but yeah, we're going to read more to the Placidus system. So it will get a little bit confusing at times. If it gets way too confusing and you're too new, go to whole sign. But yeah, I recommend trying to follow along and maybe just rewatching the video over and over until you get it. And then also looking at some of the examples that I've posted on TikTok to try and understand how to use Placidus if you want to be more accurate. So the next rule or guideline when it comes to death in astrology is that there is one thing that will never be written into your chart as the pattern that's expected for your death. And this is something I don't know if social platforms will allow me to say, so I'm just going to call it unaliving. But that is never going to be written into your chart. Like that as a rule for souls is just not something that is done. Souls don't waste life like that. Souls appreciate life. On the other side, obviously when we're incarnate, we have free will. We can do what we like. We can break patterns, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And so, yeah, the soul will never intend for us to go that way. So you never have to see that in a chart. Like it will never be there. But yeah, there's always exceptions to the rule. There's always ways to break the pattern of what's supposed to be written for you, what's written in the stars for you. And that's one really clear example. But also this can happen on smaller levels. Like we can have a pattern in our chart of like how we're meant to go, but because we do have free will, like on occasion, we'll exit a different way. Usually we'll exit a different way following a similar pattern that might just not have been as obvious in the chart, because usually there'll be like one dominant kind of easy thing to pick out, and then there'll be a few other things that you can be like, well, it could have gone this way or that way or that way. So that's where kind of soul free will comes in. But for the most part, what you read and intuitively find should be the way you go out. If it's not, it'll be something following a similar pattern, and on a very, very, very rare occasion where we break the pattern completely and do something totally different, it has to be very extreme, like unaliving, or like where karma and soul contracts have got entangled in a weird way. That's like the other time where things can go a little bit different. So the last little guideline that's best to follow is, because we're talking about patterns here and we're talking about kind of the big death, obviously, but there's also lots of little deaths in life, that if you're reading something in the chart that like doesn't exist in your life, if it's not already a pattern in your life, you've probably gone down the wrong lane. Whatever you're reading for how you're going to yeet, it probably already exists in your life today, especially if you've already been through your Saturn return and you're really locked into your chart. If it's before your Saturn return, it can be like a little bit more open. But after your Saturn return, everything that, whatever's written for your death, that pattern should exist in your life currently. So this is really easy to tell, like, when celebrities like already have certain problems with certain things, it just makes it more obvious, like what that pattern is eventually going to lead to, and it eventually summing up to their like final yeet. So whatever you're reading in your chart, it should make sense based on your life today as it stands. If it feels like a bit of an anomaly or it feels random, that means that we haven't read the pattern correctly. So you have to make sure the pattern fits, and that's like the best way to read astrology accurately. You got to get really good at pattern recognition, which is why some of the best astrologers are autistic, because they have that like sixth sense for pattern recognition. So yeah, that's also the important thing to make sure that you're going down the right track. It needs to feel possible. It needs to feel like it's already a pattern in your life. If it feels like it would be totally out of the blue, you've probably gone down the wrong path and you need to start again. Finally, some charts are easier to read than others when it comes to death. So if you go through all the steps in this video and it's still not making sense, you just might be in a case where you're most likely going to need a professional to help you. If that's the case, if you find this video not helpful, like you have a too complicated chart to like read it without like an in-depth understanding of astrology and kind of all the nuance, because there will be things that are just like too much detail that I just can't go into this video into, and just like too much background knowledge that you kind of need to have to read really, really well. Then obviously I'm here for you. I have a link in the description below so you can book a reading. You do have to book like a proper long format reading, but I have an option to add on a mini astrology death reading to any of my major readings. So yeah, I'd recommend getting a natal chart reading and then adding on a death reading if this video is a little bit too complicated, or this video is not helpful enough because you have too much of a complicated chart to read accurately. If it's not making sense, that's your best option. But hopefully for a lot of people, along with like your intuition and kind of being able to Google some things about certain astrology placements or astrology signs and things like that, hopefully you'll be able to fill in most of the blanks and get most of the picture so you have a reasonably good idea by the end of this video. But yeah, if that's not the case for you, if you have a bit more of a complicated chart, especially if your Placidus kind of like makes everything sit really weird, then you can always get a reading from me. Yeah, so the link to request one will be in the description box below. But now that you know what we're going to be looking at, why we're going to be looking at, and some basic kind of guidelines to follow while we look at this for you, and yeah, how to know if you're on the right track or not, we're going to get into the meaty part of this video and teach you how to look at all your birth chart placements and figure out what the most likely cause of death for you or someone else is going to be. So the absolute first thing we're going to look at is what sign is on our 8th house. If you're reading whole sign, there'll only be one sign there. If you're reading Placidus, there can be anywhere between 1 to 3 signs there. So if you either only have one sign there or you're reading whole sign, you're laughing, it'll be super easy. If you're reading Placidus and there's 2 or more signs there, you need to look at the interpretations for every single sign that is affecting that house. If you have 2 signs affecting that house, the first one is kind of how you start the energy. The second one is how you finish the energy. And if you have 3 signs there, it'll go start, maintain, end. So on the screen, I'm going to break down the major themes of each of the signs. And what you're going to do is any sign that you have on your 8th house, you need to know what themes that sign is going to activate. So Aries is very body focused, so it tends to be more along the lines of physical injury. Taurus is more of an overindulgent sign. Gemini rules the nervous system. Taurus also rules the throat, so it could be a throat thing. Like there's lots of different ways to interpret all of the signs. And so this is going to be like my basic, these are the most common ways they manifest in this particular theme. But I would also recommend like doing a little pause of the video, going to Google and Googling like basically every single thing that you can find about each of the signs and what they are associated with, what they activate, what chakras they're associated with, things like that, and what body parts they're associated with. And it's better to have like a really exhaustive list because you're immediately going to be able to cross a bunch of stuff off because you're like, well, it doesn't fit the pattern of my life, so it's most likely not going to be those things. But you'll be able to circle a few things where you're like, it could be any one of these. And then the further we go down the process, the more you'll be able to rule out. If you're reading Placidus, it's mostly going to be that initiating sign most likely 9 times out of 10 that gives most of the details away, but you want to do this process for every single sign that you have affecting that house, and then doing the same thing, eliminating things that are absolutely like obvious no's, and then circling things that it's like definitely a potential. And if you do have more than one sign on that house, you're going to try and look at relationships between things. It's best if you kind of like column them off, and then in the first sign's column, if there's any clear relationship between the first sign and the second sign, usually your chart's been created in that way for a reason. They're supposed to have a relationship for a reason. In that theme of that house, there's going to be something relational going on between those two signs. So usually that's another indicator of like you're close to the money. But you want to have a pretty exhaustive list for every sign that you have on that house. And then as we go down the process, through the process of elimination, you'll figure out like what's most likely. It's usually something to do with the very first sign. So once you've found a bit of a realm of possibility when it comes to the sign on your 8th house, you're going to look at your Mars placement next, because this is how you're aggressive towards yourself. And this is going to indicate like how you might be so aggressive to yourself, it's going to result in your demise. So what you're looking for is you're looking for a relationship between the sign that's on your 8th house and how that relates to where your Mars is placed. So you're going to go back to the themes of the zodiac signs, and particularly looking at whatever zodiac sign your Mars falls in. So if you have a 8th house Aries and you have a Cancer Mars, you're looking for the relationship between Aries and Cancer. I've like forgotten which signs that I said. And you're looking at how they're relating to each other and like what's the connection between those two things, like what story could they be telling together. So now you should have an exhaustive list of the sign or signs that are on your 8th house, an exhaustive list of the place, the sign that your Mars is in. And now you repeat that process, but then for the house that your Mars is in. So on the screen, you'll see some of the themes that each of the houses point to. And then you're going to create another exhaustive list of the house that the Mars is placed in. This is another one that's better to do Placidus. You want to use the Placidus house rather than the whole sign house, because it's much more accurate. And then once you have now 3 exhaustive lists, you're going to do a 4th exhaustive list, and this is going to be the degree that the Mars is placed at. So each degree is ruled by a specific sign, like the 2nd degree is a Taurus degree, 17th is a Leo degree, 28th is a Cancer degree, and you're basically going to, again, do another exhaustive list of like all the things that could be relating to the sign that rules whatever degree your Mars is at. And this is another reason why it's really important to have your accurate birth time, to make sure that that degree is accurate. And then what you're going to do is you're going to play a game of connect the dots between those 4 things. So you should have 4 like columns of possibility in terms of like the way you're going to yeet. And there should be a relationship between those 4 things. If you can only find a relationship between 1 or 2 things, you're probably not on the right track. 9 times out of 10, you're going to find a relationship with all 4 things. There's going to be a thread that connects all 4 things. And hopefully, if you're not 100% certain, your intuition will come online and help you out, help you find that thread. You might need to meditate on it for a day, sleep on it, journal on it. But hopefully something will come up that connects those 4 things together to tell a bigger story. I, on very, very, very occasion, have seen kind of 3 connections and the 4th one being a little bit more vague or fuzzy. But yeah, you're really looking for like, it needs to be clear. You need to have all 4 components kind of accounted for. If you're missing a piece, it probably means that you're off track a little bit, and potentially you might need some professional help from a professional astrologer to kind of maybe see the link, because it might be that part of your 4 things, your 4 dots, is speaking to a more obscure part of that sign. yeah, that's a potential as well. If you're really struggling to find the connection between the 4 dots, I would recommend going to my TikTok and looking at how I connect the dots in some of my example videos on my TikTok that I've recently made about some potential celebrity deaths, so that you can kind of see the kind of mental kind of performance or gymnastics, I guess, that you go from one sign to the next to kind of piece each individual bit together to get a bit of a whole picture. So that's the best thing to do, is to see examples, and potentially to, if you're really struggling with your chart, like maybe trying a few celebrity charts, especially celebrities that you know have passed, so that you can get really good at practicing connecting the dots, just keeping in mind that anyone who's unalived themselves, their chart's going to say something else, and there's always exceptions to the rule, and sometimes people go about things in a different way based on free will, that might not be the dominant pattern, but is definitely still kind of an underlying pattern or a variation on the pattern that's written in their chart. If you did find that reasonably easy though, and you found a very clear thread, the other thing you can do if you want more nuance is you can start to look at aspects. So aspects to Mars can play a difference of how that Mars energy will manifest. So you can also look into that to like add on more detail. But then the final thing we do is we look at the ruler of the 8th sign around the zodiacal wheel. So this one, it's usually better to look at your whole sign, 8th house, and then find that ruler. I personally always use the traditional rulership, especially when I'm asking questions about someone as a person. If I'm asking generational questions, I might acknowledge the modern rulers of the signs, but you want to use the traditional ruler in most cases to paint a picture about the conditions of a person's death. And for this process, it's a very similar process. It's kind of separate from the first bit that we did, but you'll find that there's usually some sort of relationship between the two once you've finished. But basically what you do is you look at whatever signs on your 8th house using whole sign systems. Say you have Aries there, then Mars is the ruler. Say you have Libra there, then Venus is the ruler. Say you have Capricorn there, then Saturn is the ruler. And you look at wherever that placement is placed within the rest of your chart. So once you locate where that sign ruler is, then you do a very similar process. So the first thing you want to acknowledge is what sign it's in, and then again create an exhaustive list of everything that could relate to. Then you're going to create a list for what house it's in, everything that house relates to. Then you're going to look at the degree that it's sitting at and do an exhaustive list of everything that degree entails. And I think I'll leave some slides at the very end of this video for you to pause on if you'd like, and have like a bit of a bigger summary maybe of those energies. I think that might be helpful. And then basically what you're going to do when you have those 3 lists, you're going to cross out anything that's like an obvious no, like it's not really a pattern in your life. Be a little bit more open with this one based on the conditions, because there's other energies that'll be influencing what the conditions of your death are. So yeah, you've got to be a little bit more open. Maybe don't be as ruthless with the culling. And see if you can see a link between those 3 things that seems reasonable, that seems like it actually would be a condition of your death. And try to make sure that you're fitting those 3 things as best possible, that you're not being like adding in other energies that aren't like written there, and that you're also not excluding anything. Like you want to make sure that it fits as tightly to those 3 like energies as possible. So you're looking for another kind of like relationship or story of what they can be telling about the conditions of your death. And this is like anything surrounding your death. It's fairly broad, so it can, give you lots of details, but usually the main things I think about is like, what is this saying about who might be there? Whether I'm going to get to say goodbye to people or not, whether I'm going to be like in a nice environment, or whether I'm going to be, maybe by myself, things like that. Like that's kind of what you're looking for the conditions around your death. And again, it's like, follow your intuition. It's a very intuitive process. Eliminate things that don't make sense for your life, or that don't make good connections between each other. And then, yeah, you'll use that to explain the conditions of your death. Again, if you find that really difficult, go look at some examples. If you're finding it really easy, you can add on by looking at some of the aspects, especially between the chart ruler and other placements, but also any maybe energies that are in the same sign or house or things like that. Like that's how you can start to build on and get more nuance. Again, the best thing to do is practice, especially on multiple charts. Like look at other people doing interpretations, like look at my TikTok videos where I am applying this knowledge. And then also, especially doing it retroactively on people that have already passed, practicing on their charts can help you develop the skill of pattern recognition and being able to link things. Because yeah, pattern recognition is so important to astrology. It just takes time. You've got to give yourself time to get good at that pattern recognition and to be able to see the links between things. So they're the best things you can do. I will leave detailed written instructions in the description below, so you can write out all the instructions and try and follow them as well. If me speaking the instructions haven't landed as good, some of us aren't auditory visual learners. Some of us like reading and writing in order to learn. So that's another option for you if you're still struggling. I definitely find sleeping on it, meditating on it, journaling on it helpful, like going away, coming back to it and practice, definitely helpful. So yeah, hopefully now you have a bit more of an idea of like how to apply this to your chart, or at least you're equipped to continue to practice it until you can kind of like unlock the knowledge from your chart. But again, if your chart is a little bit more complicated, especially if you have multiple signs on your 8th house, and or your whole sign 8th house is nowhere near your Placidus 8th houses, like that's definitely super complicated as well. You can always add on the mini death readings onto any of my major astrology readings and I will help you. So that's always there as an option. That's all I have for this video today. So hopefully you found it helpful. And remember, you can always come back to it later after you've learned a little bit more about astrology. That definitely helps. And yeah, my only plugs are like you can get a reading from me and I'll help you. My other plug that I normally have is that to sign up to my tarot course. However, I do have to say I've had a lot of issues with Teachable, which I kind of had been mentioning in some of my previous videos. So at this stage, my online tarot course is paused. I can't actually get onto Teachable to actually pause it. I'm having so many issues with their tech support in trying to access my account. So I think at this stage, it's looking like I might need to pause the release date, maybe release it at the end of next year, and through next year in early 2023, host it on my own website and expand my website so that I can host it, because it looks like that Teachable is not going to be helpful enough. And if I can't access it now, I don't want to not be able to access my account when there's like heaps of people subscribed. So if you've been thinking about subscribing to that course, most likely I'm going to refund everyone that does, and I'm going to have to host it on a platform myself later. So just be aware of that. That's most likely what's going to happen. I just have to figure a whole bunch of stuff out. I have to figure out how I'm going to like fund it. I'm probably going to need like someone to help me with the web design because it is super complicated. So it's probably going to push back the launch of my course for another 12 months, which is super unfortunate. But yeah, you can support me by getting personal readings done so that I can afford to do the platform and then afford to like have my site, have everything expanded, have some help, and then host first a tarot course. I do have some other courses coming with some fun collaborations that y'all are going to love. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. There's a lot happening. There's some tech issues. This is the problem of like having your own business and being the only person on the team. Like you have to deal with everything, and sometimes it's just hard, and that's the situation, and it's really unfortunate, but it is what it is. So yeah, I think on that note, Thanks so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure like walking you through the process that I go through to read death in astrology. I hope you found it helpful. And until we see each other again, ciao.